Good evening, everyone. My name is Kim Hunt. I'm the Executive Director of the Pride Action Tank, which is a project of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago. The Pride Action Tank is a project incubator and think tank focused on action projects and initiatives that improve outcomes and opportunities for LGBTQ people. And we have the show on the first Friday of the month, so we are very happy to see you here. And just so you know, if you want to find out more about Pride Action Tank, you can reach us on our website at prideactiontank.org. We also have a Facebook page. We're on Twitter. We're not on Instagram or Snapchat yet, but that may change with our digital policy director from AFC, Joshua Oakes, who is running the phones today.
Hey, Joshua.
So today we are going to talk about a pretty timely subject. Our guest today is Kelly Suzanne Salisbury, who is the Director of Policy and Outreach at the City of Chicago's Commission on Human Relations. Kelly is also a dear friend and co-chair of the Advisory Council of the Pride Action Tank. And before we let Kelly talk, I mentioned that this is a very timely discussion. Earlier this week, the Second Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that sexual orientation is a defensible or protected class under Title VII of the I'm tripping on my words today, of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that sexual discrimination, because sex is a protected class, sexual orientation is a protected class in sex discrimination cases. And a lot of people don't know this, but in many parts of the U.S., sexual orientation and or gender identity are not protected classes at the state level, and it's not a protected class or has not been a protected class at the federal level. In fact, there have been a number of attempts to create legislation and pass legislation that would protect LGBTQ people at the federal level. And former President Obama signed an executive order a few years before he left office to protect federal employees and others who had federal contracts. But for many parts of the U.S., LGBTQ people are not protected. So we're going to talk with Kelly about the work of the commission and your work in particular. Two big areas I know are discrimination and hate crimes. And talking about hate crimes, we know that there's been an increase in hate crimes nationally since the election, and that LGBTQ people are more likely, in fact twice as likely, to be the target of a violent hate crime than Jews or African Americans. And that trans women, while they represent 10% of hate crime victims, they represent nearly 45% of hate crime fatalities. So I just wanted to kind of throw that information out there as we talk about what's happening here locally in terms of Chicago, in terms of protections for LGBTQ people. And we should point out that Illinois and Chicago are those rare bubbles where both gender identity and sexual orientation are protected classes. So with that, Kelly, would you describe the work of the commission and also let us know what you do?
Yes. Well, first of all, Kim, thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
So excited to be on the show and to be talking to you. And so, yes, so I work at the Chicago Commission on Human Relations. The commission is the City of Chicago Civil Rights Department. And we are tasked with enforcing the city's human rights and fair housing ordinances. And we do that in a few different ways. One is through investigation and adjudication of discrimination complaints. So in the areas of public accommodations, employment, and housing, public accommodations being any kind of business or organization that's open to the public, and as I said, employment and housing. There are 16 protected classes that are protected from discrimination. In other words, you are not allowed to discriminate against anyone on the basis of these classes, which include race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, military status, source of income, age if it's over 40, and then a variety. There are 16 protected classes. And so if someone finds that they have been discriminated against in the areas of employment, housing, and public accommodations based on one or any combination of those 16 protected classes, they can file a complaint with the Commission on Human Relations, and we will investigate that complaint. So, so that's investigation part. The other part of our work is involves education and more community-focused work, if you will. And we have at the Commission what's called an intergroup relations team, and that involves doing some education work in schools and nonprofit organizations, or just organizations in general, to educate people on bias and discrimination and diversity and inclusion. We do a lot of work in schools, working with not just the students, but also parent groups and staff and faculty on anti-violence and anti-bullying, which also includes cyberbullying. We also do a lot of conflict mediation work between individuals and groups that are in conflict, and we advocate for victims of hate crime.
Okay.
So that's the scope of the work at the Commission on Human Relations, and the work that I do in particular there involves public engagement. So actually working with different community groups, nonprofits, constituents, organizations, etc., to let people know that, number one, the Commission exists. There are some people who've heard of us, but there are many people who have not. And so we want to let people know that we are a resource. We are here for you. You can file a complaint that is free of charge, with the exception of taxpayer dollars, but there's no there's no,
I'll pay for that.
Right. But there's no charge to file a complaint or anything like that. So we want people to know that we're here. And so I do the public engagement work. I also work with different city departments on different initiatives when it comes to things that are related to the Commission's work. And I also work on some policy related and other kinds of initiatives related to civil rights and the enforcement of the city's human rights and fair housing ordinances.
And you mentioned the Human Rights Ordinance. So we were able to partner with the Commission, Pride Action Tank, and other organizations to get the Human Rights Ordinance to be more inclusive of transgender and gender non-conforming people. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they can partner with a government agency to help move policy. And unfortunately, Commissioner Mona Noriega had been working on the issue for about a year or so. And as our Chicago Restroom Access Project, or CRAP.
The acronym we love.
We love it. But as we were forming and doing our work, we were able to help push the work that the commissioner had already started doing, and I think that's just a great lesson in how to partner nonprofit organizations or community-based efforts with governmental entities. And you and I did a whole workshop on that at Creating Change earlier this year.
That was great.
Yeah. So we hear these terms discrimination and hate crimes, and when I am talking to folks about discriminatory issues and that sort of thing, I talk about biases, beliefs, and behaviors, right? So, we're all a little biased in one direction or another.
Yes.
And that's something that we have to guard against. We have beliefs. Sometimes oftentimes folks' beliefs are incongruent with what the facts may be. And it's okay to have your biases and your beliefs, but it's when you get to behaviors.
That's right.
Where the problem comes in. So could you talk about, people don't necessarily know how to distinguish, for example, hate crimes. What is a hate crime?
So a hate crime, this is a good question, because sometimes people come to the Commission and say, someone called me a really bad name. Or someone, robbed me, or someone, called me, the B word or something like that, and they think that that is a hate crime. but there is actually a very federal and official definition of what a hate crime is. And that involves being a member of a protected class where there are actually federal protections. So you cannot, there are stiffer penalties that are associated with committing a crime and targeting an individual based on their actual or perceived belonging to one of those groups. So race is one of those groups, disability, so people with disabilities, that's another group, religion, that's another group, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion. So those are the protected classes. So as an example, if someone were to come and attack you and just hurt you or hit you, that would not be classified as a hate crime. But let's
Not automatically.
Not automatically. But if someone were to make it very clear verbally that they were targeting you because of your actual or perceived belonging to a group. So as an example, if someone were to attack me and to say, you effing N-word, it's clear that the basis of that attack is because of my belonging to one of those protected groups. That would be a hate crime, but or that could be charged as a hate crime or pursued in that way. But sometimes people think just general insults, because it's offensive, automatically is a hate crime, and that's not the case. It's very specific.
Yeah.
And the reason that is because not only, is a hate crime based on someone's identity or belonging to a group damaging to that person, but it's actually a violent offense against that group. And it's an immutable characteristic often. And so therein lies the difference.
Okay, so that individual is like a proxy for the larger
That's right.
group in that person's mind often.
Yes.
I want to remind folks that this is a call-in show, and we will happily take your questions and comments, as long as they're clean and not bad. The number is 312-738-1060. So if someone suspects that they are a victim of discrimination or a hate crime, what should they do? How do they file a complaint?
So our process in terms of hate crimes is triggered by being notified by the Civil Rights Department of the Chicago Police Department.
Okay.
Now, we are very aware that for multiple reasons, there are individuals and certain community groups that are not comfortable with filing complaint with the Chicago Police Department. People have different relationships with law enforcement for different reasons. But our process is triggered by that. So if we do work with groups that work with individuals or marginalized communities or underrepresented groups so that they can feel comfortable filing a report with the Chicago Police Department, that way an investigation perhaps could be underway. And then we are notified that a hate crime may have occurred. And so then when we get notified of that based on the wonderful relationships we have with really good individuals in the Civil Rights Department at CPD, then what we do is follow up with the alleged victim. And we introduce ourselves, we make them know that the commission is here for them. We ask them, what are some supports that they need.
Okay.
And there are certain things that we can provide of assistance if a person wants or needs that. And sometimes people just are not familiar with the process, don't know what it's going to be like, it's intimidating. And so we will accompany that person to the police department. We will also accompany that person to any court hearings or proceedings. We provide Spanish translation services, like in Spanish, and if there are other translation services that are needed, we work to try to secure that.
Okay.
We also offer some referrals for pro bono legal services, as well as other social services like counseling and things like that people might need, so we do those referrals. As well as arrange transportation to court hearings, because sometimes people just need that. It can be just challenging just showing up at certain places. So those are some of the things that we do, as well as proactively go out to communities and organizations and talk about what a hate crime is, the damage that hate crimes does to not only individuals individuals, but to communities. And so we do a lot of the education work on the front end, and then try to be as responsive as we can on the back end when we receive those incidents.
Very nice. We know that underreporting is an issue, and you mentioned some of the discomfort that people have, historically,
Sure.
for many reasons, with reporting anything to an authority.
Sure.
What are some things that the commission does to help people understand the importance of reporting issues of discrimination and hate crimes?
So one, if things are underreported, it's very easy for people in institutions and groups to think that it's not a problem.
Right.
Right?
You're not counting it.
You're not counted. And unfortunately, if you're not counted, you're just invisible.
Yeah.
And so even though we are definitely sensitive to the vulnerabilities and circumstances that may make people uncomfortable with going to law enforcement, one of the things that we try to do is work with organizations and nonprofit and advocacy groups that know who we are, what we're about, that trust us, and that have relationships with those constituents that would be targeted and perhaps vulnerable. Because that's very different than if we're just trying to reach out to people who don't know us. So we go through groups and individuals that have a relationship with those communities. But also in our education work, we make sure to say why it's important to file a complaint or partner with an organization that can work on your behalf to help you do so. There is a lot of underreporting, and we know that people of color, as an example, we know that transgender people, especially transgender women of color, we know that people with disabilities are, are targeted for hate crimes, and so. And so it's really important to be counted and to be visible in that way. So whatever that we can do to help people file a complaint or to talk to the police or go through whatever other entity so that their information isn't lost and they're not in the margins, we try our best to do that within our jurisdiction.
No, that's, I appreciate that. Oh, looks like we have a caller. Hello?
Yes, I have a quick question. So for some, I know it's difficult to report like discrimination based on their workplace and to be able to say that it was because of a protected class they're part of. So what is some advice for people trying to collect evidence in the state of Illinois about if you say you're terminated for being LGBTQ? Are you able to, in the state of Illinois, record conversations that happen with your the people that you're working with? What is that process?
Wow.
Thank you.
That's a really good question.
Deep question.
That's a deep question. I might have to follow up with some of the investigators or the legal department for that kind of advice. But if I'm not mistaken, I think, please don't take my advice as gospel, but I think it is not legal to record someone who doesn't know they're being recorded and then introduce that as evidence.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can do that. But look into that.
Yeah, probably the best thing to do is to go through the process of filing the complaint and letting the investigators tell you what to do next.
Exactly.
I know it's so tempting when you're going through a very difficult work situation or whatever it may be to not try to take matters in your own hands, but fortunately we have a commission at the city level, we have something at the county level.
Yeah, the Cook County Commission on Human Rights.
And then the Illinois Department of Human Rights.
Yes.
Right? So we have great infrastructure at all levels of government in this area of the country, which is, it's unfortunate that many other areas of the country don't have this level of protection, or at least the infrastructure to look into these situations.
Yes. Something I would like to say, if I can, is with regard to anything that you're experiencing in the workplace, is to do what you can to document everything.
Yeah. Write it down, though.
Yes. Don't record people and then introduce it. But I would say document exactly what you're experiencing. And be as specific as you can so that when you go to, whether it's the Human Resources Department or the Commission on Human Relations or the Illinois Department of Human Rights or whatever entity you go to, the most substantive information you were able to share with the investigator, the better it will be.
Mm-hmm.
It will help you.
Thank you for that question. You mentioned the commission being proactive before, and I know you're proactive in many ways. And one of the things that the commissioner did after the Pulse nightclub shooting was invite organizations that work with Muslim communities, LGBTQ communities, and Latinx communities to come to the table together and to begin to just get to know each other, talk about their experiences and that sort of thing. And that meeting has grown into this amazing coalition called the Trust Collective.
Yes.
And I'd love for you to tell the viewers about the Trust Collective, because I think personally, as a member, but also looking at it from a more global perspective, I think this is a great model for doing work across communities.
Yes, absolutely. So in response to the Pulse nightclub shootings in Orlando, Florida, the Chicago Commission on Human Relations was involved in several community response meetings and press conferences and those kinds of things, addressing not only the act of hate and violence that took place, but how really important it was for us for people not to resort to retaliation and making blanketed statements about certain groups, for example, as Muslims, and not to give into division. Right, and the commission was approached about convening a group of individuals and organizations from LGBTQ, Muslim, and Latinx communities. And obviously these three groups are not mutually exclusive, but we were asked to convene individuals and organizations from those communities to find out, in response to this, how can we censor the voices and perspectives of these three groups? And do we want to work together? If so, what do we want to do? How can we do it in Chicago? And that kind of thing. And that's actually what we did. We had our first meeting in July of 2016. And there was just really a lot of interest and motivation and determination to really, out of such a terrible tragedy, let's all come together as not only a group, but our respective communities and our organizations and really work together. And that's exactly what we did. We have a mission statement. It's about censoring the voices and perspectives of Latinos and Latinx and Muslim people to really reduce targeted violence, to educate, to bring different communities together affirmatively, to have dialogue, and those kinds of things. We had a retreat in February.
Yes, we did.
And it was a wonderful retreat, and so we're actually working on, planning what we want to accomplish over this next year together. But in between those two times, we actually really gained some visibility and traction. We put ourselves out there in the community. We participated in community meetings and town hall forums on LGBTQ rights and gun violence, and we wrote statements against the Muslim ban and the targeting of sanctuary cities and all of those kinds of things, and really are doing the best that we can to amplify the work that other community groups are doing, because we are a part of those communities and we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we want to be engaged as a trust collective to have a voice and to amplify. And it has been a real labor of love for me. Like the commissioner, our commissioner Mona Noriega has just been wonderful, and she was all about this, and she was like, yes, let's do it. But I also want to say that the Trust Collective is its own entity. It was initially convened by the commission, but it's its own entity, and we're very glad to be a part of it. I've been really pleased to work with so many wonderful, passionate individuals like you and so many others who are a part of it.
Aww. Yes, it is. I know it's a labor of love for you because you're doing all the in-between work. but it's a joy to be a part of that collective as well.
And before we wrap up, can I tell people how to connect
Sure.
with the commission?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So if you want to file a complaint or have any questions about our work or how to file a complaint of discrimination or want education workshops on bias and discrimination or anti-bullying, you can actually reach our offices at 312-744-4111, and you can also email us at info@cchr.org. That's info@cchr.org. And we also have a Facebook page, Chicago Commission on Human Relations, and you can find us by going to the City of Chicago's website and clicking on Chicago Commission on Human Relations. And our offices are located at 740 North Sedgwick, and that's off Sedgwick and Superior.
Thank you, Kelly. We really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you.
And if you didn't catch all of that, we'll have, you can contact us at Pride Action Tank. Before we go for real, I want to make sure people know about our next summit at Pride Action Tank. It's called Out Aging, Summit on Our Possibilities, and it's a summit on LGBTQ aging issues. It's going to be May 23rd through 25th, and you can register at the website here. You can also go through our page at prideactiontank.org, and we look forward to seeing you next month, the first Friday of the month. Thank you again, Kelly.
Thank you, Kim.
Everybody have a great month.
Bye.